Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Royal Blue podcast. I'm Ian Croll, joined by Joe Thomas, who is back from his week-long stay in Ireland following the Blues. What's going on, Joe? How are you?
Yeah, very good. Cheers, very good. Been a long week, but with the exception of the the bad news on Friday, which is very bad news. Other than that, it's been pretty decent.
Good stuff. So, Joe, as people will be well aware, Everton's prospective takeover by the Friedkin Group has collapsed and the takeover is now off. Me and Gav Buckland sat down in the Royal Blue studio yesterday. We reacted to the breaking news, and you can watch and listen to that show on our Royal Blue podcast platforms. But Joe, as that news broke, you and Everton were preparing for the first preseason friendly of the campaign against Sligo Rovers. But, before we get into the takeover collapse, just give us your reaction and your verdict after the 3 draw over in Ireland.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable game. That's definitely true. I think the important thing to remember is I could have predicted what Sean Dyche would tell me after the game well in advance of it, when I knew he'd say that the result and the performance wasn't necessarily what mattered. I think that he backed that up in his actions. Obviously, it was 2 different 11s for each 45 minutes, and in the training schedule for the week that came before it on Thursday, the players did double sessions, so they had 13.5 kilometres in their legs going into that Sligo game, which you wouldn't normally have. And it was a second double session in 3 days because it had one on Tuesday as well. So it was never going to be about the result. But all that being said, I think everybody breathed a massive sigh of relief when Youssef Chermiti showed that class in the final stages to bring those 2 goals and spare Everton's blushes a little bit with the draw. I didn't think it was a bad performance. They got punished at the back a little bit, but Sligo are a team that's midway through their season, so obviously helps them in terms of their own sharpness. For Everton created a lot of chances first half. The goalkeeper Connor Walsh was superb. Dominic Calvert-Lewin missed a couple of good chances. McNeil had a one-on-one saved. Walsh saved brilliantly from Abdoulaye Doucouré and very well from Mopé as well. I was having flashbacks, I think, of those Wolves and Fulham games last season when Bernd Leno and Jose Sá just had 11 out of 10 performances and Everton got done with a sucker punch. But second half, I thought they were much brighter, and I really liked the first glimpses of the new signings. I thought Timo Robbenum and Iliman Ndiaye both looked decent. Jack Harrison looked very sharp, which I think is fantastic news for Everton. He didn't have the best back end of last season. Obviously, it was a long season for him, having started with such a big injury. And having such a huge workload because it was only really him and Dwight McNeil that Dyche trusted out on the wings. But Chermiti was a star man, and it was great to see. And both Sean Dyche and Abdoulaye Doucouré said this to me after the game when I was speaking to them on the pitch. Both of them reminded me, not that I need to remind them, that Chermiti had some positive cameos at the back end of last season, and it very much looks like he's taken the confidence from those performances, carried it through the summer, and started pre-season with it, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, plenty more friendlies. Is there 4 friendlies still left to play now before the start of the new season? Is that right?
Yeah, it's Salford, Coventry, Preston and Roma.
Which will no longer be the Friedkin derby, unfortunately. But yeah, we'll come on to some of the takeover talk then. Friedkin has pulled out of the deal, but will obviously remain a partner for the time being due to his lending of hundreds of millions of pounds to the club. Since yesterday, more minor details, I suppose, have emerged regarding the collapse, which obviously we're going to go into this show. But first off, Joe, did this come out of the blue for you, or were you hearing whispers, throughout the week that something was wrong? Because for me, it did seem like a bit of a bombshell.
No, I think it was a bit of a bombshell. I think it came out of the blue for everybody, really. And I say that because the Friedkin Group only informed Mashiri on Thursday. So he was only told that, less than, certainly less than 24 hours before the club put it out as an announcement. Obviously, once he'd informed, some of the messages started to filter through a little bit. But no, it came as a surprise for me. And it was a bit of a sucker punch, I think, as well. I was on the train to Sligo from Dublin with a lot of Blues, and you could just see it's been a really positive summer so far, and it's been nice. And what's felt different is for the first time in a long time, there's been almost a sustained run of positive developments at the club, and it's felt easy and justified to start to believe that progress is around the corner. And a big part of that, I think, was the collapse of the 777 deal, and then the pickup of the Friedkin group and what appeared to be a credible pair of hands to perhaps take Everton through the move into the new stadium and navigate some choppy waters and hopefully bring back some exciting times to the club. But so that kind of provided almost like a veil of serenity over the past month or so. Felt like we were all able to stop looking at the finances a little bit and start looking back towards the football. And as a result of that, I think the beginning of pre-season friendlies was was part of that. So for hours before the first kick-off to get that news, I think everybody just started to I think it just hit everybody hard, and not just here but in the club as well. I obviously spend a lot of time in and around the club, and there are a lot of people there, a lot of hard-working people that care very deeply about the Blues, and obviously it's their livelihoods as well that are impacted by things like this. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that, and I think there were lots of ashen faces in regards to that around the club as well because of that, and the uncertainty that will now follow as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joe, it was only this week where you provided some of your video diary updates where I've produced and uploaded to our Royal Blue YouTube channel, and you've literally talked about the air of positivity around the place. Obviously, that is within the the squad and the playing staff and the coaching staff, which is obviously fantastic. Just aside from the takeover thing, before we go deep diving into that, it's important that continues, obviously, isn't it? With the playing staff and onto the pitch, because it's just so vital now that Everton remain a Premier League team over the next 10 months, and then moving into Bramley Moore the following season, because the realism of it is that Everton need to remain a draw to these potential buyers coming into the club as well. So the air of positivity just has to remain.
Yeah, well, I think this is a group of players and staff that are well versed in having to fight through the off the field issues to try and produce positive displays and results on the field. They had to do that for too much of last season. They may well have to start this season doing the same again now. And as frustrating that is, at least they've been exposed to this already. I'm sure that this news will have kind of caused a bit of frustration amongst them as well. But luckily they've been able to put aside a lot of this noise, particularly over the April and May of last year. Points deductions, takeover problems, all that was still going on when they had that brilliant week in April when they won 3 in a row, including the derby, to guarantee safety early. And then they kept on with the good performances. They were really unfortunate to lose to Arsenal in the final game of the season. So we know that they can do that, and I think that we can have confidence that they'll do their best to. But obviously, it does create a casting of a shadow over the club and the supporters and things like that for the coming weeks until hopefully this gets resolved again with a new bidder coming in and hopefully finding a way to navigate the issues the Friedkin group couldn't.
So, are you able? I'm sure you haven't had much time to, navigate what, why the deal broke down. But if you're able to go into the intricacies of why everything has collapsed. I mean, I'm hearing reports of such as Mashiri was looking for £50 million as part of the deal, where Friedkin only wanted to, pay up £1 because of the huge amount of debt. We know the statement released pointed to the fact that Friedkin was concerned with the risk of the 777/ACAP debt, and everything else with regards to their issues that they face over in the USA. So were we able to provide some clarity for exactly why things have happened the way they have?
Yeah, well, the statement released on behalf of the Friedkin Group and Blue Heaven Holdings, which is the vehicle through which Mashiri owns Everton, that didn't make any reference to 777, but essentially, and what it did make reference to was the fact that there remains a positive relationship between the two groups. So when you hear talks about, maybe the breakdown was between Friedkin and Mashiri, then, perhaps whilst Mashiri is a very difficult person to maybe negotiate with and deal with, I think it's important to bear that in mind. The reality is that it's the 777 debt that's the problem, and it's not the size of it. 777 lent the best part of £200 million to the club. Now that's not a small sum of money, and the Friedkin Group have the wherewithal to be able to deal with that. But the problem that they've got is, I think my understanding is they basically had too many questions that were too difficult to find answers to, just in relation to how that money came about, who it is that they'd have to pay off, and under what circumstances and what risk it would carried alongside it. Since it started to happen before the deal with Everton collapsed, but the world of 777 and what was a very complex business portfolio that stretched across multiple industries around the world, that has unravelled considerably. Certain key players have gone. They've lost the support of key backers, and they're embroiled in regulatory and legal issues in different jurisdictions around the world. And essentially, I think that the problem that the Friedkin Group had was they were left in a position where they weren't quite sure how they could satisfy that debt without potentially, without being 100% certain that things were going to, they were dealing with the right people and things like that. So they didn't want to expose themselves to the risk of getting caught up in that wider maelstrom that 777 are now part of. But the problem being that for Everton now, anybody else who comes in would have to try and do the same thing. I mean, I think a couple of key points that have been explained to me is that the Friedkin Group didn't see Everton as uninvestable. They didn't look at as their due diligence. The problem wasn't within Everton and Everton's finances that emerged. It was specifically with the 777 stuff. So it seems like a lot of the work that has been done to maybe improve Everton and straighten Everton's finances and position out has actually succeeded. The issue comes with these external links to some of the lenders that they've had to get into bed with over the recent years as things have become a little bit more difficult. So there was a belief that maybe they could wait and see how things played out with 777. As I say, they're in a part of a lot of different complex processes at the moment, and maybe they might resolve some of the issues around it. But I think that the Friedkin Group didn't really want to wait around, and they didn't want to risk looking like they were stringing Everton along whilst they tried to wait and see how those issues with 7-7 resolved themselves. So,
I mean, we've been here with 777 before, haven't we, Joe? With regards to trying to get answers specifically when the Premier League were trying to carry out the, directors test and owners test, and they were just then unable to get the appropriate answers that they needed to pass, which in a way, worked out well for Everton. For all intents and purposes, it looks like Everton have dodged an absolute bullet with regards to 777 taking over that. But where does it leave Friedkin then as a potential investor for the future? We know he's lent the club money, and he said he's open to lending the club further money if needed. Obviously, we know Bramley Moore. We don't know whether is that still need paying off, or what are we saying with regards to that? We know funds have kind of been released to carry out further works, or are we? Is there a suggestion that is fully paid off now?
Well, the Friedkin Group put around £200 million into the club when they signed that exclusivity deal, and what they did was they essentially paid off the £158 million MSP loan. So essentially, that's one big piece of debt that I think the end of this process, really what's happened is the club still owe it. It's just changed. The people that they owe the money to has just changed. But the rest of that £200 million, so £40 million was put towards operating costs for to help Everton take towards some, for more payments towards the stadium, which I think is it's getting much closer to being paid off, but isn't quite there yet. But obviously Everton they've managed to use someone else's money yet again to kind of meet the bills on that. Which it has to be remembered that 777 did as well. It's a really strange one because for a group that were clearly so problematic for the club, and I think we're all grateful that they didn't get over the line with it. It doesn't really bear thinking about where the club would be if it hadn't had access to that £200 million between September and May. So kind of in a really strange situation. But obviously, the people that Moshiri got into bed with by signing his exclusivity agreement with 777 and taking those loans with, that caused problems at the time because they didn't get regulatory sign off, and it's still causing problems now. So, and it's going to be something that any new buyer is going to have to deal with as well. So we'll have to see how all that goes.
Just staying on with Friedkin then, do we know if he, as part of the due diligence, tried to speak with ACAP to renegotiate the £200 million loan that obviously 777 had provided Everton with the money, or was he just unable to due to legal reasons, which obviously we know they're involved in the US? I'm just confused as to what that process was really. You might not know, but I'm just thinking, is it a negotiation tactic from Friedkin himself, or is he just couldn't negotiate and that's literally the end of it?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a negotiating tactic from Friedkin himself. I mean, I think he threatened to walk away from Roma when he sought to buy them, but I mean, it's understandable. You can see just how complex this is. So, I think bearing in mind how many different suitors there were that emerged when 777 deal collapsed, if he genuinely thought that Everton was a really enticing prospect to take over, which he clearly did when they signed an exclusivity agreement in the first place, he probably wouldn't have risked losing it now, having ventured as far as he did, because obviously what could happen is, on the one hand, no one might emerge, and it might therefore make things a little bit easier down in the long run. But there is a danger that one of those interested parties comes back again and Friedkin loses the opportunity. So if it's a negotiating tactic, it feels like a very risky one. So I'm not convinced it's on that. In relation to his conversations with who he spoke to and dealt with, I don't know the intricacies of those conversations, Ian.
Yeah, no problem. That's fine. I mean, the scrutiny then, Joe, will obviously fall back on Farhad Moshiri, who now is, gone through 4 processes of trying to sell the club, 4 buyers. Inevitably over the course of the next couple of weeks or months, a 5th buyer will probably, get involved. What can we take from this from Moshiri? Just because Friedkin just seemed to be the right fit for Everton. It seemed like that was the right way for Everton to go, and now it's literally back to the drawing board, back to square one. And me and Gav spoke briefly about any new prospective buyers, but obviously that's not going to happen now for probably a long time as well.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to say that prospective new buyers won't emerge quickly. There were a number of complicated bids that had been put together, consortiums that had been put together, financing that had been put together just a number of weeks ago, when different bidders were competing for the club. So, if any of those bidders were to have, I'm sure most of them were monitoring developments at the club, and I know that some of the interest didn't dissipate when Friedkin Group signed the exclusivity deal. I think there was if not an expectation from some, I think there was an awareness from some of the rivals that the process wouldn't be straightforward and an opportunity might emerge again in the future. The question is probably less whether they have a want and a desire to return to the table, and more probably how they interpret Friedkin walking away in relation to 777 funding, and whether they think that'll be a problem for themselves. So, from a club perspective, it's back to square one. Of course it is. Moshiri's been trying to escape the club for 2 years. He's had 4 exclusivity periods, 3 over deals to potentially have new owners of the club. One with MSP was for a 25% or so stake, which might have been a foothold into the club that they would then use to eventually get a controlling one. And that's 2 wasted years that's seen Everton get further and further into debt, whilst the club has had to, and the fan base and the players have had to deal with more and more instability. Unfortunately, that's now going to continue for, at the very least, the coming weeks while new bidders emerge or old bidders return to the table, conversations are had, and then all that will lead to is another exclusivity period, probably a 5th. And then all 4 have failed so far. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much hope we can take from a 5th one as well. But, it certainly means that new ownership is further away, not closer. And that isn't a good thing for the club.
Yeah, I mean, the positive news, Joe, is that, we reports and we're being told that the club is funded at least for the short term, and that, any transfer activity ingoings or outgoings, is not going to change. We obviously the big transfer saga for Everton this summer has been Jared Branthwaite. It's this deal, this takeover deal not going through has got no impact on ingoings or outgoings, has it?
Not in the short term, no. The club insistent that the club's in a decent position financially for the short term, and I think that's easy to probably back up The clubs in general are probably at the healthiest financially at this stage of the year. They've just got things like the first tranche of TV money, and the transfer window gives them the opportunity to strengthen their position through selling players, of course, as well. Look, Everton were always going to have a tight summer, and that hasn't changed, and it wasn't going to change. A lot of Kevin Fowler came out before the beginning of the summer transfer window and said, look, players will probably have to be sold. There's going to have to be a bit of ducking and weaving, a bit of savvy operating to try and both strengthen the squad and also make the squad more sustainable. And I think a lot of the work has been done so far has been with that in mind. We saw the sale of squad players last month to kind of get over the line from a PSR perspective, and that was important, and that was work that appeared to have been done well. So that was a positive, and nothing was being done with the expectation that even when the takeover with the Friedkin group was hoped to take place, it was unlikely to be completed before the transfer window, and it certainly wasn't. Business wasn't being done with the expectation that a glut of money might become available at the end of the transfer window to finish things off. Everything's been taking place within the context of the financial position that the club started the summer in. So we can take heart from that, I think. And also, I've just written the story now that's in the wake of the takeover collapse, Everton have informed Manchester United that they're still going to hold firm on their valuation for Branthwaite. And I think that's a good strategic move from the club, I think, to be perfectly honest, because I think it's probably the closest thing that the club can do to sending out a salvo right now to reassure supporters that there's no reason to panic in the short term, because we've all seen the speculation from outside the club over the past 24 hours, which has been people saying, oh, this player could go on the cheap, that player could go on the cheap. Lots of people trying to draw inferences without actually perhaps knowing the details. And whilst it's not easy to know those details, and whilst I don't know all of them, in Branthwaite, Everton have somebody that they could sell for a lot of money and could ease a lot of problems from a financial perspective. The fact that they're choosing not to use that at this stage, and certainly not in the short term, is a really positive sign. I think it shows the importance and the strength of the work that's already been done this summer through the sales that have already been achieved. Obviously, that includes the expected departure of Amadou Onana for around £50 million for Aston Villa once he's back off his holiday, which I think he is this weekend. And so, there are also other opportunities within the squad, and I think the Dominic Calvert-Lewin situation is probably the next one. I think that's been a priority for a while, that and searching for a new winger. But with him out of contract next summer, and with him out of contract next summer and not signing a new deal, I think he would be the next resource that would be perhaps used to bring in a bit of money for the club, either to spend on the squad or to help perhaps, boost the coffers ahead of the winter months and things like that. But that's something that was already there. Again, that's not a reaction to what's happened yesterday. That's part of the plan already. It's interesting, I'm not sure if you've seen, but Callum Wilson at Newcastle has just picked up another injury and is now out for the start of the season. So Newcastle again are in a tricky position there because they have a long-standing interest in Dominic Calvert-Lewin and held talks with him, or with the club over him, last month, and they fell through. They were ideally having to make a decision as to it was either keep Callum Wilson and trust in his body, but then lose him on a free next season, or sell him this summer to try and help fund a replacement who was a bit younger and perhaps a bit less prone to injuries. Not quite sure where the Wilson injury leaves him now, because it probably leaves him in the worst of both worlds, where they're probably going to struggle even more to get a fee for him and not be able to access him for the start of next season. Newcastle are a player that have already brought in significant transfer funds during this window. There is a potential that might draw them back to the table over Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So, I think a sale of Jarrad Branthwaite is a long way off unless someone comes in with a mega offer that meets Everton's valuation at this stage. The only caution I'd have in relation to the impact of the takeover collapse on the club's finances and activity this summer is just perhaps towards the end of the transfer window. When you get to late August, which is a long way away from now, it's still 5-6 weeks away. But if you say, for instance, there's been no progress on the takeover front by that point and things look a little bit more complicated, perhaps bidders may be scared off by the failure of the Friedkin group to navigate the 777 issues. If we get to the back end of August and then there's still no progress and no one stepping forward, then it might have a few problems, because I think the club is sound for the next few months. That's certainly the message that they're saying internally. But once the transfer window closes, you then have September, October, November, December, when you have a big period there where bills still need to be paid, wages need to be paid, stadium needs to be finished off, interest costs on the debt that's already there need to be met. Yeah, there might be, I wouldn't be too surprised if there are a few nervous looks, a few decisions to maybe we'd be a little bit more proactive about selling players just to help protect us in the long run. But a lot has to happen for Everton to get to that stage first, and depending on where they are with obviously completing the sale of Onana and potentially moving on Calvert-Lewin, they might be in a position where they're confident enough that they can wait until January to have to consider those topics, which would obviously give 4 months or so for movement on the takeover. So you would hope that something would progress in that time frame.
Just to finish off then, Joe, any new bidder is going to have the same issues that Friedkin has had with regards to, any due diligence and, finding things out in the books and, the issues with regards to 777 and ACAP. So where does Moshiri go from here then? Because, it's like I say, he's just going to have the same issue over and over again. Is it a case of just waiting until any court case with regards to ACAP in the US is finalised? Is it, someone who's just willing to take on that risk, partnering up with 777/ACAP, someone who's willing to just pay the debt off in full? I don't know. These are all options that obviously must be under consideration. It's not looking great, is it, at the moment?
For a long-term perspective, no. Obviously, it's more instability in a situation where Everton could really do without that. We've lived with it for so long already, and it does have an impact on the club and everything around it, including what goes on the pitch. So it's a situation that needs to be resolved as soon as possible, but again, it's hit another stumbling block and it's a big setback. There's no doubt about that. From Moshiri's perspective, it's difficult. Obviously, he's dealing with the consequences of his own decisions by bringing some of the people he's brought into the club and who he's decided to deal with, and perhaps also the timing of when he started to seek people to perhaps buy the club. Maybe if he'd started the process a little bit earlier with the club in a healthier financial position, there might have been a different course of events. So, it's difficult. I think the only thing that Moshiri has within his power to do is, well, he's got two things. One is, there seems to be a sentiment that an insistence that he has the ability to help keep the club going if needed to be. How much money he has access to and his willingness to actually do that remains unclear, to be perfectly honest. So hopefully we won't find it out. But I think you only have to look at what's happened over the past year. With 777, he was using their money, then the Friedkin Group's money to pay the bills. So that isn't a particularly promising sign, although it would have obviously protected some of his own assets, I guess, which may have to be called upon. Probably the only thing that he can do is just try and make it as easy as possible for somebody to come in and create the conditions to make it as easy as possible for whoever comes in to actually complete a takeover. Whether that means trying to find resolution in relation to 777, or whether that means perhaps changing the conditions with which he'd be willing to reach a deal on himself, some of his own personal terms. I'm not sure of the exact figures, but my understanding is that he would like to at least get something back for all the hundreds of millions that he's pumped in. Nowhere near the amount that he'll have lost in the club, but at least something. Well, maybe he'll have to kind of draw back on some of those, help create the conditions which make a new bidder more willing to deal with some of the other issues that are in the closet. So, it's problematic. There's no doubt. I think the only thing what Everton fans can probably take a little bit of hope from is two things. One, there were lots of bidders. A month ago when this all started, there were lots of interested parties. I'd be very surprised if not one of them didn't have some interest. Now that Everton are back on the table. And then the other thing is, as I say, that message in relation to Jared Branthwaite and Manchester United, whilst the club might still be looking to do business elsewhere within the squad, the message that it's not willing to sell its biggest asset and one of its most promising talents on the cheap at this stage of the window, bearing in mind all that's happened in the past 24 hours. I think that has to be taken as evidence that perhaps backs up the club's claims that things are fine in the short term.
Well, I suppose as a final remark, Joe, that's probably the most positive we're going to get out of this podcast, isn't it? Jared Branthwaite hopefully staying with the club's stance and public stance, I suppose, directed at Manchester United. you've literally just got off the plane, haven't you? And if anyone's obviously watching on YouTube, you can see Joe is actually in the airport. So literally off a plane, dedication to do the Royal Blue podcast for us today. So yeah, Joe, any final remarks before we do finish off?
Yeah, just that it's been a great week. So spent a lot of time in and around the camp, sat down with a fair few number of players and staff, and things were genuinely very positive. The mood was very good, and look, what happened off the pitch yesterday will have an impact on that. But I still think there's reason to be hopeful that things will carry on progressing. Big question, I think, actually, was something that we haven't touched on, is James Tarkowski and his injury. Obviously, he flew home early with a glute issue. Sean Dyche told me last night that he hopes it's only minor and the early return was a precaution, which is obviously a positive sign. But we have to also bear in mind it was serious and deemed serious enough for him to go home early as opposed to stay with the squad for the rest of the camp. And the fact that James Tarkowski has such few injuries, this is a player that played in every single Premier League game last season. There's understandably going to be a concern there, because if it was to be something that was more problematic, then centre-back becomes a big issue for Everton. Such as the importance that James Tarkowski is, not just in terms of his ability on the pitch, but also his leadership ability when Seamus Coleman isn't on it as well. He's obviously the standing captain, so it's. I think he picked it up on Thursday. I saw him on Wednesday. Where the club was saying they had a golf course there, and the golf course was basically separated between the nearest town and the hotel. And I was cutting through there on my walk back after having sat down with Beto, and I saw James Tarkowski and had a hello with him and catch up, because he's someone that you see a lot of during the season. He stands up and does the media duties a lot, speaks very well. He seemed fine then, so hopefully it's only a minor thing, and even if it's something a bit more serious, there's still plenty of time for things to sort themselves out before the start of the season. But Everton could do with that not being a serious issue. But no, other than that, I think it was a good week. The players all seemed happy. Understanding is that Gaffer's Day is on Tuesday. Sean's been saying he's not telling anybody when it is, but I've spoke to a couple of players whose understanding is all that is on Tuesday. So they've got that to look forward to and prepare for psychologically. But yeah, other than that, it was good. It was great to see, the complex that they were staying at, 5-star fancy complex, but they might have kept it secret where they were, but playing supporters found out. One of the things that was nice is that anybody that made the journey there seemed to get the time from the players when they were coming in and out of their training sessions. There was a lot of goodwill, a lot of generosity with their time. It was nice to see. And it was great to, because I spoke to quite a few listeners whilst out there. A lot of people said hello, and mainly because they recognised my voice rather than my face, because of my distinctive weird twang. But it was just great to hear from so many people and so many readers and so many listeners, which really, we're really grateful for their attention and their engagement. So thank you to anyone who stopped and said hello to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Good week for Everton, obviously on the training pitch. Not so great off it with the collapse of the takeover. But Joe, I'm sure you will provide plenty more coverage of that on the Liverpool Echo website. We will be providing more coverage on the Royal Blue podcast on YouTube, as well as Spotify and Apple Pods over the course of the next couple of days. Get your comments in, get your opinions in, even if you just want to have a rant. Get your comments in on the YouTube channel, and also leave us a review on our audio platforms as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the Royal Blue YouTube channel and give this podcast a like. All interaction is very much appreciated. Joe, I'm going to let you go because I'm sure you want to get home, see the family and enjoy your Saturday night. So yeah.
I've still got stories to file, Chris, Ian.
Oh, well, no worries. No rest for the wicked then.
Absolutely.
No worries. Okay, well, thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you for watching. I've been Ian Croll, joined by Joe Thomas, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.